Welcome to the Creating Wealth Simplified podcast. My name is Lauren Wells, here with my co-host, Chris Seveney. We're committed to providing you with the knowledge required to build wealth through real estate investing. Tired of consuming content about real estate? Stuck in analysis paralysis? Ready to do your first deal? As a member of our community, you will learn how to go from consuming content to taking that first step into the world of real estate investing. Our show is not about getting rich quick, but about providing you with the knowledge you need to take action. Join us as we speak with experienced investors who share action tips on how to escape the corporate world, start a thriving side hustle in the world of real estate, and go beyond your W-2 or 401k.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Creating Wealth Simplified podcast. I am your host, Chris Seveney. Today, I am going to apologize in advance. There's certain days, there's certain times when I can get a little, boisterous, heated, excited. And today is one of those days. And honestly, I hope I'm proven wrong with this, but I don't think I'm going to be. So, Chris, what are you talking about? I am talking about the huge influx and the love for seller financing. Now, there's good ways to seller finance, and there's ways to seller finance, and there's times when seller financing is a good option, but also times when I believe it is awful. And people, I'm not going to knock those that do seller financing because I know some people, Fred and Tracy Rui, for example, do a lot of seller financing and they are excellent at it. And they have a great training program. They are great. And they would be, if I put the model of who's great at seller financing, I would put them up there on the, the mount. What's a mountain with all the presents? As I talk on this episode, I'm going to bash seller financing. And I'll tell you why and go through my reasoning. But I'm talking on both sides of my cheek because there's also opportunity in that space and some really good opportunity. So here's why I'm going to bash seller financing. Certain aspects for how people are using it. And I'm seeing a lot of people seeing seller financing go, oh, that's the next hot thing. I'm going to sell my house and I'm going to sell it seller financing. Okay, cool. And first question I ask people when they ask me about it is, is your house financeable from a bank? I'm like, yeah. And people think, well, the banks finance properties all the time. I want to be the bank, which I am a bank. There's full disclosure. We invest in notes. But people don't understand the banking industry. And the banks will give people loans at 3, 4, 5% because A, it's other people's money, but it's only 10% of other people's money. It's 90% of money made out of thin air. What do I mean by that? Google fractional lending or the fractional banking system. Banks write loans and don't have the money to write the loan, essentially, is what it boils down to. So if somebody gave you $10,000 and you could write a $100,000 loan with that $10,000, I bet you would do it all day long. Because that's what the banks do. Someone gave you $10,000 to write a $10,000 loan. Is it worthwhile? So let me give you an example of one. Let me start with my first example of why, if I had a $250,000 property and let's say I owned it free and clear, why I would not seller finance it. And the first simple analogy is you just hit the lottery and just hit $250,000 on a scratch ticket. Do you take the annuity payment over 30 years or you take the cash, which might only be $175,000? What's every financial advisor tell you to do? Tell you to take the cash. Why? Because you can invest that money, most likely better or at a higher return than what you could lend it for. We'll get that in a second. But secondly, in 20 or 30 years, that payment of $1,000 per month is basically going to be probably a cost of your monthly cell phone bill. It's basically worthless. So let's dive back, though, to what I mentioned about investing it in arbitrage and getting a better return. People need to understand when you are lending money that you get knocked, charged ordinary interest rates. So if you're in a 27% tax bracket, you lend somebody and get $1,000 of interest that year, that gets tacked on and you're basically paying 27% on that $1,000. Whereas if you bought a stock and made the same interest, you're paying probably 15% on that. So the net versus gross factor. Gross numbers look great, but when you net out the taxes, it doesn't look that great. So that's one example. Now, I'm going to continue on this $250,000 seller finance because the house might only be worth $250,000. And let's say they sold it for $270,000 and got $20,000 down. Great, they got the $20,000 down. Let me ask you this question. It's at 100% loan to value, essentially. Let's say they got 8% interest. How many people out there would invest in any type of fund, syndication, offering, you name it, where you're giving somebody 100% loan to value at 8%? I went into a multifamily deal and they're like, oh, we'll give you 8%, but it's 100% loan to value. Do you think that's a good deal? At 90% loan to value, do you think it's a good deal? At 80% loan to value? I can name 15 funds off the top of my head that can pay you more money to do zero work that I believe would be less risk or significantly less risk based on the asset, not on management, just the asset, and get a better return. So I think people just want to be in the game. And they're doing things that, to me, that are just stupid. Being flat out honest. So, and a lot of these people who do this also don't even know what they're getting themselves into. If I sell or finance a loan to John to live in the house, do I know that, I need to use a licensed servicer? I need to send CFPB compliant statements every month? If I don't, then technically might not be able to charge interest on the loan or default interest on the loan. Do I know that for every time I do that, I could be subject to a penalty that $40 or $50, but times 12 times a month? No. Did I even use an attorney to write up the right documents or contracts? What happens if that borrower goes into default? What happens if home prices drop by 15% and they don't want that property anymore? Is all that risk worth getting 6, 7, 8%, or better taking the cash, investing it elsewhere? Now, if you invest it elsewhere, most likely you're going to be passive, but put your ego aside, stop being, and be what is the better situation. So that is my first rant. So let me talk about my second rant, because I'm seeing this. I think I counted 7 instances on BiggerPockets and Facebook over the past 5 days where this has been the case. I haven't bought an investment property, seller financed, or subject to, take your pick, which is seller financed. I have a renter in there. It's cash flowing, but X happened that I can't fix. I don't have the money to fix. How do I get the money? One was sewer line collapse. Another is a HVAC system broke. Another was the roof is in deplorable condition and requires repairs. Another is discovered there's knob and tube wiring in the property. Another was they got a lead paint notice. Another was a plumbing system backup. Another was the refrigerator. Can't have $1,000 to buy a new refrigerator. Broke. Another was, again, the HVAC system. So starting to see people who were not qualified or have the cash to support the maintenance on an asset. Even though it might be cash flowing $100, $200, $300 a month, they're cash poor. They can't fix it. If they can't fix it, what's the tenant going to do? Paying rent. You need to do this. You need to take care of this, or I'm going to move out. And then what happens? They default on the loan. Then the person who sold it to them is now going to have to, go back and take that back. Now, in this whole craziness world of subject to, they're defaulting on a loan that's not even in their name, that's in the original borrower's name, and that's just a whole nother rant that I could go down that, I feel bad for people who sold houses subject to, because in the next 24 to 36 months, I should pin this, but you're probably going to start to see a lot of issues on those properties, fortunately. So as we continue kind of, call it my rant on this seller financing world, this is really, people, I think, getting in over their head. Now, another avenue that I've seen people start to look at is not understanding, when they do seller finance, the exit. We have an individual, actually an investor in my fund, who I've joint ventured with, sold loans to. He's bought loans from me. Great guy. And he'll send us, he does he does brokering, and he does seller financing, and he does very well at it. But sometimes he'll send us loans that people originated at 4 or 5% and don't realize the amount of discount they're going to need to take for that. Here's an example of, we actually bought a loan from him that had, I want to say, about a $650,000 or $700,000 loan balance, but it was written at 5%. Investment property backed by 3 properties worth probably roughly $1 million. I think we paid about $450,000 for that note, which was a $200,000 discount. And at first, the seller didn't want to sell it because they really didn't want to take that discount. They thought they'd get par for that loan. But again, if I can go put money in a bank and get 5%, why would I, with zero risk, and probably, some instances, maybe even preferred tax treatments, why would I want to do that versus dealing with a borrower who at any point in time could lose their job and stop paying? So the reality was they had to sell. And we were the only ones that would buy that loan because they needed that cash. People got too cash strapped. And we bought it, and it's been paying, and it has a balloon, I think, the end of next year. He'll probably pencil out, knock on wood, to, very return for us. But looking back at it, would those borrowers, would they have been better off selling the properties for $150,000 less, taking a $200,000 haircut on the note? Yeah, because they were $50,000 more. So that's where, for me, I know there's a lot of people out there talking seller finance, wanting to do seller finance, because it is the next sexy thing that I see after, the short-term rentals and the subject twos and all this stuff that's going on. But I sit here and rant because I tell people to be cautious. And again, think big picture and understand the risk, because everyone forgets, in my mind, the risk they're taking. And I'll go back to what I said earlier, that a lot of these loans are being written that I'm seeing. And again, let me step back. When I look at the stats that Fred and Tracy put out, people are putting 25% down on properties. So that is the norm. That is the average that's out there. So I do have to stipulate that. So what I'm really bashing on this episode is not that. It's not people doing the proper underwriting. It's not people getting the decent down payments and things along those lines. It's people using it to and not thinking about the risk that's involved and increasing the price of homes and thinking, oh, okay, well, now you're increasing your risk. There's a gentleman, actually, I'll share this. Gentleman Bigger Pockets posted a post that I am overpaying for homes and proud of it. And this person's going and offering $10,000 or $20,000 more per property and getting it on seller finance. And basically then turning it in, trying to put rentals in there or whatnot and trying to make the numbers work. And that's great today that the numbers work. But overpaying for anything is never a wise decision and typically does not end well. And this individual is most likely, as they're in a market that is starting to soften, probably unfortunately going to get crushed. And I look back at my buying career of early 2000s when I bought my first house in 2001. And then at that point in time, houses, I want to say, were appraising like 3-5% per year, which it was like a $200,000 house. Let's say appreciated 5% per year. For 3 years, it went from like 200 to like 230, 240, which is where I sold it. But when you also look at when I bought it, I had to pay closing costs and title insurance and everything, and probably paid $7,000 to $10,000 in closing costs. And when you sell it, you pay another 10%. Let's say I paid 5% up front, which is 10, and then another 7% on back end, 24. So of that $240,000, I probably spent $25,000. So did I really make any money on it? I made very little. I still made, maybe I made 10 grand. Great, but it's not, the price went up by 40. It's not that I made 40. And this is where I think people are relying too much on appreciation, not on management, and realizing that today, if you buy a $200,000 property and you go to sell it, you're going to net 185, but all of a sudden, if the market drops by 10%, you're at 180, but you also paid 220 for it because you thought you were being smart. And then you have an issue with it, tenant moves out, you can't afford it, and this happens to all your property. You're just in a negative liquidity situation, which increases your risk, and it gives you no exit unless you're going to short sell or file bankruptcy. So I think people need to be careful on that front and just understand, what they're doing in seller finance. And I'll rehash why I stated from the beginning. If you want to learn seller finance, I recommend you to look at people like Fred and Tracy, who I have no affiliation with them, by the way. I'm not getting paid to say their name, or I don't get any kickbacks for recommending them. But they are somebody who teaches it well. Make sure you get the down payment. Make sure you do it right, is what they do. Unfortunately, I'm bashing it because there's a lot of people out there teaching the wrong way to do it. And because I think there's more people out there doing it wrong than right, I'm going to lead the problems down the line. So just my opinion. I love to hear other people's feedback. So feel free to reach out to us and tell me what you think. Well, thank you for listening to this episode of Creating Wealth Simplified. As always, make sure to leave us a review, a like on your favorite listening channel. Take care. Thank you. Thank you for joining Lauren and I on this episode of the Creating Wealth Simplified podcast. Each week, we bring you expert education, experience, and information in a digestible format to help you identify investment opportunities so you can build wealth through real estate and take action toward your financial goals. Enjoy the show, share with a friend, or subscribe to the show and leave us a review.